top-down healthcare financing mechanisms or impose prescriptive mandates. True progress and sustainable health outcomes do not come from UN mandates. They come from multi-stakeholder male and female. To achieve this, we will use clear and accurate language that recognizes women are biologically female and men are biologically male. The United States expects the United Nations to ensure that its documents and programming align with that policy by using terminology that clearly refers to women and men, girls and boys, upon China and other global health crises. Its failure to adopt urgently needed reforms and its inability to demonstrate independence from the inappropriate political influence of WHO reforms. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland to speak on behalf of the European Union.
Of draft decision A/80 /L87 on the scope, modalities, format and organization of the high-level meeting on universal the language in OP10, which has been adopted repeatedly by the General Assembly, ensures maximum fairness and transparency by giving on operative paragraph 10 presented by the Russian Federation. I thank you.
We have heard of Japan.
Thank you, President. We call the vote amendment proposal by Russian Federation. Remaining challenge to achieving the sustainable developing goals and to accelerate our collective efforts. Japan has maintained the universalist coverage for 65 years since achieving it. USA is not something that burden of the NCDs, rising healthcare costs driven by the innovative medicine and technology and demographic change such as the population aging, the directly affected, including the patient organization and civil society. Guided by the principle of the leaving no one behind, we must continue to listen to diverse voices in order to action. We believe the multi-stakeholder hearing in preparation for the high-level meeting should also hear from as broad a range of the voices as possible. From this perspective, Japan firmly opposes Amendment L91, which seeks to delete the reference to the broader communities. We hope many member states will also oppose this amendment. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. Distinguished colleagues, we have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before the vote. We will now proceed to take decision on draft resolution A/80/L87. In accordance with Rule 90 of the Rules of Procedure, the Assembly will first take a decision on draft amendments A/80/L91 and A/80/L92 one by one. The Assembly will first take a decision on draft amendment A/80/L91. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/80/L91, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/80/L91. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 22, against 76, abstentions 30. Draft amendment A/80/L91 is not adopted. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now proceed to the voting process. Those in favor of draft amendment A/80/L92, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The Assembly is now voting on draft amendment A/80/L92. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 20, against 76, abstentions 38. Draft Amendment A/80/L92 is not adopted. Distinguished colleagues, since draft amendments A/80/L91 and A/80/L92 were not adopted, we shall proceed to take a decision on draft resolution A/80/L87. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/80/L87 entitled Scope, Modalities, Format, and Organization of High-Level Meeting on Universal Health Coverage. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/80/L87, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/80/L87 entitled Scope, Modalities, Format, and Organization of the High-Level Meeting on Universal Health Coverage. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 141, against 3, abstentions 0. Draft resolution A/80/L87 is adopted. Distinguished colleagues, before giving the floor for explanation of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 5 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Turkey is committed to supporting the active participation of NGOs, civil society organizations, academic institutions, and the private sector in the work of the UN, as this is essential for achieving our common goals. A large number of NGOs, as well as other stakeholders from Turkey, have already been contributing to all spheres of work of the UN and working together with the UN all over the globe, in particular in most vulnerable countries. We strongly support the participation of NGOs and other stakeholders to the work of the UN, as long as their objectives and activities are in line with the principles and purposes of the Charter of the UN. Mr. President, Turkey supports those NGOs and other stakeholders whose activities will contribute to the high-level meeting on UHC. Yet we cannot underestimate the fact that some NGOs may engage in activities that run counter to the purposes and principles of the Charter. Necessary politicization of discussions, which makes it difficult to achieve constructive dialogue and consensus. We believe that the criteria and principles formulated in ECOSOC Resolution 1996/31 should apply to all NGOs who seek to participate in the conference. For the purposes of transparency, for an informed decision-making, it is highly important for member states to know in detail how those NGOs and stakeholders plan to contribute to the for NGOs that do not hold consultative status with the ECOSOC. We remain concerned that in the absence of adequate information to assess applications, the resulting decision by the General Assembly
Turkey. I now give the floor to Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We voted in favor development agenda. Health cannot be conceived of as a privilege or a good to be traded. Rather, it is a fundamental human right that states have the responsibility to developed nations. We maintain a broad network of health services across the country's territory, and we continue to train healthcare professionals that are committed to millions of people. However, these efforts face extraordinary obstacles as a consequence of the intensified blockade imposed by the government of the United States against Cuba, which is exacerbated by the and medical technologies, spare parts, specialized equipment, and essential primary inputs for the national production of medicines. Moreover, and vaccines and other critical infrastructure within the healthcare system. The surgery wait list is growing. The maternal infant to the principles of solidarity and international cooperation that inspire this resolution. Universal health coverage can only become a reality when deep inequalities that
I thank the representative of Cuba. I now give the floor to Argentina.
Gracias.
works that go beyond its specific aim. In particular, it includes references to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and it gives a role to the World Health Organization, in respect of which the Argentine Republic maintains reservations. Policies. Our vote should not be interpreted as questioning the goal of expanding access to good quality health services, but rather a reaffirmation of the need to preserve the strictly procedural nature of
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Mr. President. The Islamic Republic of Iran voted in favor of the resolution, which nor does it establish any new commitment for member states. Any commitment undertaken by states remains subject to their sovereign consent and applicable national legal frameworks. Finally, our participation in the preparatory process should not be
The floor to Timor-Leste.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Timor-Leste welcomes the adoption of the text. We commend the core groups for their leadership in advancing this important initiative. Unequal access to essential services. Unless these underlying challenges are addressed, universal health coverage and sustainable development goals will remain beyond reach. The resolution rightly recognizes that improving health requires a whole of government quality health service. For Timor-Leste, climate change further compounds the challenges. Floods, drought, and landslides damage countries to lead their own health priorities while promoting regional collaboration, including Timor-Leste's participation in ASEAN to enhance preparedness and improve access to essential medicines and health technologies. Mr. President, and partners to translate these commitments into meaningful action. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor.
Relevant resolution by the United Nations General Assembly. Universal healthcare coverage is an important component of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Chinese government places the protection of the WHO in carrying out about healthcare reform pilot projects which have achieved positive progress and notable results. China stands ready to contribute the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, China has adhered to the principle of putting people and lives first, working hand in hand with countries around the world to resist the politicization of the pandemic, attempts to engage in political manipulation under the pretext of COVID-19, and efforts to shift blame and responsibility onto China as the authoritative and professional continue, as always, to support the World Health Organization in fulfilling its mandate, deepen international cooperation in public health, and strengthen global health governance. I thank you, President.
Excellency Joan Fauna Rovira, the permanent representative of Andorra to the United Nations, and His Excellency Chai Faivid, permanent representative The Assembly has thus concluded this at this stage of its consideration of Agenda Item 1. The role of mediation in peaceful settlement of disputes, conflict prevention and resolution, to hear the remaining speakers in the debate. Accordingly, pursuant to Rule 72 of the Rules of Procedure of the Assembly, when a representative exceeds her or his allotted time, the President shall call the Speaker to order without delay, which will be done by means of automatic microphone cutoff. To assist delegations in managing their time, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco's commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes is born out of a deep-rooted conviction and the lives. It is cheaper than repairing the consequences. dialogue is worth more than years of war. Millions of displaced human and most effective tool, the one that can act before the guns rather than after the ruins. And yet, the needs have never been so urgent. The principles of the Charter are being openly defied. Simply with defending long-standing mediation practices through the training of Murshideen, Murshidat and Imams, through the Mohammed VI Foundation of the African Ulema, as well as through the good offices of the Al-Quds Committee, chaired by His Majesty King Mohammed VI, may God assist him, Morocco is working tirelessly and constantly to preserve the quality of the holy city and its be credible mediation without scrupulous respect for national sovereignty or for the territorial integrity of UN members. Mr. President, allow me of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, and may God assist him, the Atlantic Initiative gives the countries of the Sahel access to the ocean and a horizon for lasting stability and shared stability, because the best mediation is is an incomplete mediation table. And thirdly, we need to give life to the new agenda for peace and invest in national capacities for prevention and make preventive moderate traditions. The Kingdom of Morocco will continue to work on this tirelessly in the shared hope for a future that will not belong to weapons, but rather will belong to dialogue, not to division.
In the debate on this item. The Assembly has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of sub-item B of Agenda Item 31. Building and sustaining peace, and Agenda Item 111 entitled Report of the Secretary General on the Peace Building Fund, in a joint debate to hear the remaining speakers. Pursuant to Rule 72 of the Rules of Procedure of the Assembly, when a representative exceeds her or his allotted time, the President shall call the Speaker to order without delay left-hand side of the rostrum. I now give the floor to the distinguished
Señor presidente.
Mr. President, El Salvador is grateful for the presentation of the report of the Peace Building Commission. Remind us that prevention, peace building, and preserving peace are not abstract aspirations, rather means investing in prevention, stability, and sustainable development. Mr. President, El Salvador has the honor currently to serve as a member of the Peace Building and results-oriented political platform. Our vision of the future is clear: a commission that provides more effective support for communities. El Salvador will work constructively to move in this direction, promoting a peace-building agenda that is focused on prevention, inclusion, This is a flexible, catalyzing tool that is focused on the ground level. In the case of El Salvador, the fund support has accompanied efforts cross-border cooperation approaches in our region, particularly in the face of challenges linked to human mobility, reintegration, social cohesion, and peaceful coexistence. These efforts can only be sustained if national and local capacities are strengthened, and if there is appropriate, predictable, and long-term international support. Improve the visibility of its results, can help expand partnerships and mobilize resources in favor of national peace-building priorities. At the same time, the mandates adopted by the General Assembly. However, we agree that these shares, these assessed quotas, are not a replacement for voluntary contributions. The flexibility of the fund, its stability and sustainable development. El Salvador will continue to work constructively to ensure that the Peace Building Commission and the Peace Building Fund can remain
of El Salvador. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
And appreciate the able leadership of the current chair, Morocco. We thank the former chair for the comprehensive report on the activities of the Commission during his tenure. Commission and the Peace Building Fund in advancing the peace building and sustaining peace agenda. Three positive developments stand out. One, from the PPC and the Peace Building Fund, underscoring the lasting peace works best when it is driven locally. Second, collaboration in improving cross institutions with greater involvement from financial partners, women and youth, and local peace builders, helping significant challenges remain despite the instant demand for peace building support and evidence-based investment. Continue to face barriers in accessing direct, flexible, and long-term support, despite being at the forefront of prevention and peace building efforts. Further, advancing practical, inclusive, and sustainable approaches to peace building and sustaining peace at the national, regional, and global levels. We are being actively engaged on prevention, inclusion, peace building financing, the 2025 Peace Building Architecture Review. We also co-hosted and actively participated in multiple side events during the inaugural annual Second, expanding direct, predictable, and flexible financing for nationally owned peace building priorities and local peace academia and the private sector in support of nationally determined peace building objectives. Ultimately, the success of peace-building architecture will be measured by our ability to translate our commitment into tangible support for prevention, local ownership,
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
An opportunity to renew our shared commitments to build peace. We align ourselves to the statement delivered on behalf of the GCC countries, and we welcome the reports on the item. Between 2023 and 2024. The efforts of the Commission are consistent with our efforts in building peace. The SG investment in prevention and resilience building and addressing root causes of conflicts through a comprehensive approach that combines peace and security, human rights, means. Given the escalating conflicts in the world, Qatar intensified its mediation efforts in partnership in a manner that will prevent the recurrence of a conflict. And we welcome the review of a peace-building architecture in 2025 and having this peace-building week. Consistent with the Pact for the Future we adopted. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar. I now give the floor to the
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Mr. President. It's an honor Mr. President, the Dominican Republic values the work that the Commission has been doing to strengthen its advisory international financial institutions, regional organizations, and sub-regional organizations, civil society, and local actors, all to support national peace-building priorities. coordination and consistency partnerships between the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and the Security Council in order to guarantee more comprehensive and sustained support. Social cohesion, addressing the root causes of conflicts, and avoiding existing risks becoming major crises. We are pleased that peace building should not be limited to the post-conflict phase. Rather, it should support countries from the very earliest signs of risk. Mr. President, financing sufficient resources that will help preserve and consolidate the progress that has been achieved thus far. It is also essential to continue strengthening the role women, peace and security, and youth, peace and security agendas. That notwithstanding, it is essential to strengthen the financing of initiatives led by those groups, that can effectively respond to national priorities. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Dominican Republic. I now give the floor to the distinguished
Mr. President, at the outset, let me thank for convening this important joint debate. In observing the inaugural annual Peace Building Week last month, we peace building. At this time, when we are celebrating the 20 years of the UN peacebuilding architecture in the context of UN 80 reform process, I wish to underline the following. Priorities by bringing all stakeholders into discussions. In doing so, priority should be given to generation of employment Second, effective partnership among national actors, UN system, private sector, civil society, regional organizations, building fund, we encourage more member states to increase their support for the fund, enabling it to respond to growing demand. We need to ensure that the PBAR recommendations are translated into actions. In conclusion, as the current Vice Chair
Distinguished representative of Bangladesh, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Somalia.
On peace building and sustaining peace, and welcomes the report of Peace Building Commission. We commend the Peace Building Commission for another productive year. For countries emerging from conflict. The adoption of 2015 Peace Building Architecture Review marked an important one of vision, but one of translating our commitments into tangible results for countries and communities on the ground. Mr. President, are most effective when they strengthen national institutions, respond to local priorities, and empower communities to become active partners that starts with prevention, continues through conflict management, and remains essential during recovery and development. If we are serious about sustaining preventive actions continue to receive neither the political attention nor the financial resources it deserves. We therefore call building requires predictable, flexible, and sustained resources that extend beyond short-term project cycles. We therefore reiterate our support for adequate and sustainable financing of peace operations mandated by the Pact of the Future. We have a timely opportunity to strengthen the link between prevention, peace building, peacekeeping, and sustainability. requires long-term commitment, inclusive partnership, and confidence in national leadership. Peace anchored in strong institutions, justice, and the United Nations systems to advance nationally owned peace building and sustaining peace. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished
Mr. President, we are grateful to the former acting chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, the permanent representative of Germany, and the permanent representative of Morocco for their comprehensive briefings and the efforts and the leadership of the Commission. Just 20 years ago, the work of the PPC began, and over the time, the Commission has gained significant institutional processes can pool efforts to avoid duplication and to, as effectively as possible and efficiency distribute share resources. One of the results of the review was the reaffirmation of the critical principle of consensus as the base observations and recommendations. In our opinion, the meetings of the Commission on the country-specific or regional-specific questions have demonstrated the greatest effectiveness. The PBC permanent given the topicality of the problem for most countries in the world, it's difficult to overestimate the practical significance of these meetings. We would note that during the country-specific meetings, there was a discussion of thematic efforts need to be priorities of national authorities, as is reaffirmed in the review of the peace-building architecture. And the interests and concerns of country recipients of peace-building assistance, even if they diverge the Security Council, insofar as this has a significant experience in matters under its purview, the PBC would be well advised to convey to the Council as per of thematic events was held dedicated to various aspects of this activity. We wish to note that in specialized discussions, frequently there is an emphasis on specific areas of peace-sustaining efforts and at the same time, given the acute scarcity of financing for international assistance, there needs to be priority on post-conflict countries to shield them from the resumption of hostilities. To conclude, we would like to wish the
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
convenes relevant stakeholders and provides a valuable platform for member states to discuss and promote peace-building strategies, including through the Peace-Building Fund and assistance of the Peace Building Fund. The Philippines has also benefited from support of the fund to strengthen the gains of the peace process in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, or BARM. The Bansang Moro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao demonstrates the power of inclusive, nationally led processes. We therefore encourage the PBC to continue Philippines calls on partners to diversify funding streams and scale up investments, particularly for youth and women-led local peace initiatives. Scope of projects. Third, the peace-building architecture must adapt to non-traditional security threats. In this regard, the Philippines notes to both the General Assembly and the Security Council must be more fully leveraged to foster greater coherence across the UN system. In this spirit, the Philippines will continue
representative of Estonia.
The 20th anniversary of the Peacebuilding Commission and the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund reminds us of the vital role peacebuilding plays in preventing conflict, strengthening evolving reality is what ultimately determines success. As we look ahead, prevention must remain at the heart of our efforts. Investing in conflict prevention, early warning, regional organizations, international financial institutions, civil society, and the private sector. At a time of growing needs and shrinking resources, sustained and predictable financing for peace building remains review is of paramount importance. Estonia has actively supported and contributed to the PBAR process. Together, PBAR and the Peace Operations Review provide architecture is under strain. We underscored the unique responsibilities of the UN Security Council, whose role remains central and indispensable. Yet, to it by waging a colonial war of aggression against Ukraine. For the fourth consecutive year, the Russian Federation has been blacklisted in the Children and Armed Conflict Report and scored that UN peace operations with clear mandates and predictable funding remain among the most effective multilateral tools for preventing and mitigating armed conflicts, sustaining peace, and responding to threats to international peace and
Estonia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
The 20th anniversary of the establishment of the UN peacebuilding architecture. Over the 2 decades, the peacebuilding architecture has played a vital role in coordinating international efforts and saw a record number of armed conflicts since the end of World War II. Peacebuilding remains an arduous task. In this context, we should seize the opportunity of the adoption of the 2025 peacebuilding architecture on peace and development. National sovereignty and ownership must be respected in all international peacebuilding efforts. The PBC should ensure full communication with governance failure. Without development, there can be no lasting peace. In peacebuilding, we should put development first and prioritize resource allocation to livelihood-related areas such as poverty reduction, fully play its bridging, convening, and advisory roles, and help foster synergy across the UN system, international organizations, and multilateral development institutions by leveraging their respective strengths. The funded projects are progressing well overall. Last year, the GA approved a assessed contribution mechanism was launched to shore up the fund. We look forward to a separate report by the Secretariat to the GA on the use of the assessed funds. Voluntary contributions remain the main source of the PBF. We call on countries in a position to do so to step up their contributions. We also support broadening peacebuilding financing channels by working closely with IFIs and regional development banks to leverage their comparative advantages in terms of funding, technology, and experience, and align them with the peacebuilding needs of the countries concerned. The people. President, China has always been a staunch supporter of and an active contributor to UN peacebuilding and consistently assisted post-conflict countries in reconstruction and recovery, as well as development. Together with the international community, China stands ready to continue advancing the implementation of the outcomes
To the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste.
Of the United Nations peace-building architecture. Together, these reports demonstrate that sustaining peace depends on sustained investment in prevention, nationally owned institutions, commit to prevention. This gap is not theoretical, it is already shaping the lives of millions. Moreover, unless we act decisively, it will continue to widen. Timor-Leste welcomes the continued emphasis on social cohesion, South-South and triangular cooperation, and collaboration within the regional organization and international financial institutions. These priorities reflect the integrated approach required to build and sustain peace. Must be taken seriously. Voluntary contribution continue to decline even as global demand rises. This mismatch is unattainable. Prevention cannot be delivered on goodwill alone. The introduction of assessed contribution marks an important milestone in strengthening the fund's financial base, and Timor-Leste welcomes the peace-building fund to deliver catalytic impact, then we must provide catalytic resources. As we prepare for the next strategic cycle, Timor-Leste encourages continued effort to ensure stronger support for cross-border initiatives and continued investment in nationally owned prevention and resilient institutions and national capacities. These are the foundations of durable peace, and they must be strengthened, not diluted, in the years ahead. As we implement the outcome of 2025 Peacebuilding Architecture Review, we must continue to strengthen the complementary roles and synergies between Peacebuilding Commission and Peacebuilding Fund. Together, they help advance nationally on prevention and peace-building efforts while reinforcing the United Nations capacity to sustain peace. Timor-Leste reaffirms its full support for the Peacebuilding Fund and for Secretary General's call to match ambition with resources. We stand ready to work with all member states to ensure that Peacebuilding Commission and Peace Building Fund remain effective, complementary, and forward-looking pillars of United Nations peace-building architecture, capable of delivering stability, resilience, and hope that our communities deserve. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste. Distinguished colleagues, we have heard the last speaker in the debate on these items. Now, may I take it that it is the wish of the Assembly to conclude its consideration of agenda items 28, 62, and 111. It is so decided. Distinguished colleagues, the Assembly will resume its consideration of agenda item 38, entitled Necessity of Ending the Economic, Commercial, and Financial Embargo imposed by the United States of America against Cuba, to hear the remaining speakers in the debate. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
Mr. President, the State of Palestine aligns itself with the statements delivered on behalf of the G77 in China, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And I am honored to participate in this important debate under Agenda Item 38 on behalf of the State of Palestine. The State of Palestine reaffirms its full and principled solidarity with the Republic of Cuba and its people against the prolonged economic, commercial, and financial embargo that continues to be imposed by the United States, and we join the overwhelming majority of nations in calling for an immediate lifting of this unjust embargo, which has for more than 6 decades inflicted profound losses and immense challenges and hardships on the Cuban people. As the State of Palestine continues to endure the devastating socio-economic, humanitarian, developmental, political, security, and environmental impacts of the 59 years of the illegal Israeli occupation, compounded by the relentless Israeli aggression against our people, including a decades-long blockade of Gaza, and severe economic, financial movement restrictions across occupied Palestine, all in grave breach of international law. We reiterate our firm opposition to the punitive embargo and unilateral coercive measures imposed on Cuba. Such measures contravene the principles of multilateralism as they erode the spirit of international cooperation embodied by the United Nations and undermine the rules and norms of international law. The State of Palestine, therefore, regrets the continued imposition of the embargo against Cuba, as well as any threats of military aggression against the country. And we join the international community in calling for the urgent mobilization and acceleration of political dialogue to end this embargo and to allow for unimpeded Cuban trade and normal economic activity, which are indispensable to the attainment of sustainable development, prosperity, and stability in Cuba, particularly at a time of growing global instability and economic vulnerability. We urge serious efforts to implement the relevant General Assembly resolutions adopted year after year for over 3 decades, calling for an end to the embargo imposed on Cuba in accordance with international law and with full respect to the sovereignty and independence of states and the freedom of commerce and navigation. The State of Palestine reaffirms once again its unequivocal support for all diplomatic efforts aimed at ending this embargo, which continues to undermine the rights of the Cuban people, including the rights to self-determination and development. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Mr. President, all protocol courtesies observed. There is no doubt that the continued existence of the embargo in contravention of the overwhelming opinion repeatedly expressed by the General Assembly undermines multilateralism and the credibility of the United Nations itself. Year after year, the General Assembly has rejected the imposition of laws and regulations with extraterritorial effects, as well as other forms of coercive economic measures that adversely affect the progress and prosperity of peoples around the world. The Assembly has also called upon all states to refrain from promulgating and applying and to repeal or invalidate laws and measures with extraterritorial effects that affect the sovereignty of other states in conformity with their obligations under the Charter of the United Nations and international law. As the world's largest democracy, India regards multilateralism as an article of faith. We therefore join others in calling for an end to embargoes of this nature, which constrain full enjoyment of economic and social development by the populations of affected countries, particularly women and children. Such measures also impede the realization of human rights, including the rights to development, food, education, and healthcare. Successive reports of the Secretary General have highlighted the adverse impact of embargo on developmental efforts of the Cuban people, including progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. In adopting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015, world leaders urged all states to refrain from unilateral economic, financial, or trade measures that are not in accordance with international law and the Charter of the United Nations. Despite these constraints, Cuba has continued to make important contributions in several sectors. Its expertise and efforts in healthcare enabled it to respond effectively to the COVID-19 pandemic, not only domestically, but also internationally, through the deployment of healthcare professionals to countries in need. This deserves recognition. People-to-people contacts hold immense potential for fostering greater understanding among nations. The people of Cuba have much to contribute to the international community. To enable this, the international community should intensify efforts to promote an environment free from sanctions and embargoes. India hopes that the embargo will be lifted at the earliest. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the delegation of Belarus joins the statement by Eritrea on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations and the statement delivered by the delegation of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. In our national position is well known, and this position remains unchanged. The imposition of unilateral coercive measures against sovereign states is unacceptable. This constitutes a direct breach of the norms of international law and the fundamental principles thereof, and which undermines the system of multilateralism and the very bedrock of civilized relations amongst peoples. An egregious example of this nefarious practice is the persistent trade, financial, financial economic blockade against Cuba. The purpose of the blockade is to compel a sovereign state, a United Nations member states whose people independently achieved freedom and independence, to change their domestic political system, to abandon the fundamental principles of their existence, their ideology, and ultimately to sacrifice their very freedom. Does this not constitute a direct attempt at enslavement? We categorically repudiate this practice, and we view it as unacceptable in international relations. Furthermore, the persistent blockade against Cuba runs counter not just to legal rules, but this flies in the very face of the principles of humanity and morality. The figures which repeatedly have been presented by the Cuban side regarding the increase in the numbers of instances of child mortality, the number of gravely ill people stripped of access to medical assistance, speak volumes, and they speak louder than any calls for defense of human rights. We believe that rhetoric has no effect when innocent children are dying and achievements ring hollow when they are achieved at the expense of defenseless people. The United Nations, through member states and through main bodies and Secretary General, has an obligation to give a fundamental principled assessments of such blatant hostile acts. Insofar as this runs counter to the principles and purposes of the United Nations, this way the organization responds to ongoing attempts to destroy sovereign state is a clear reflection of the effectiveness and viability of the organization. And Belarus has always and will continue to uphold the right of every state to independently determine its own model for development. Economic and political coercion as a method of exerting pressure on a sovereign state has nothing to do with a modern-day notion for civilized international relations. We call for full, unconditional, irrevocable lifting of economic financial blockade, and for the U.S. to lift the blockade in the spirit of mutual respect and peaceful dispute resolution. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belarus. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Following our vote, Israel reaffirms its support for the United States and its long-standing commitment to promote democracy, human rights, and accountability in Cuba. Any meaningful discussion on the situation of the Cuban people must reflect the full reality and acknowledge the various factors that have shaped their circumstances. For decades, the Cuban people have faced the consequences of failed economic policies, systemic challenges, corruption, and the continued restriction of fundamental freedoms. These realities have limited economic opportunity, hindered prosperity, and contributed to the difficulties experienced by the Cuban people today. The challenges facing Cuba are not solely economic, they are also political. The Cuban regime has for decades restricted political pluralism, limited freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, and suppressed the voices calling for greater openness and reform. Respect for fundamental rights and freedoms must remain at the center of any discussion about Cuba's future. The international community should approach this issue with a comprehensive perspective. Addressing the challenges facing the Cuban people requires recognizing the role of domestic policies and decisions that have affected their ability to fully exercise their rights and reach their potential. The international community should also remain mindful of Cuba's conduct beyond its borders. The Cuban regime has maintained close relationships with authoritarian governments and actors that challenge democratic values and international stability. More recently, reports regarding the recruitment of Cuban nationals to support Russia's war against Ukraine have raised serious concerns. Let us be clear, Israel's position is directed at the policies and actions of the Cuban regime, not at the Cuban people. The people of Cuba deserve freedom, dignity, economic opportunity, and the ability to shape their own future. Israel remains hopeful that Cuba will one day embrace democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. When that day comes, Israel will be ready to deepen cooperation with a democratic Cuba and to support the Cuban people as they build a freer, more prosperous future. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lesotho.
Mr. President, the Kingdom of Lesotho aligns its statement with those delivered by Uruguay on behalf of G77 and China, Uganda on behalf of Non-Alignment Movement, and Mali on behalf of Africa Group. The Kingdom of Lesotho takes this opportunity to renew its commitment to the principle of the Charter of the United Nations, particularly the respect of sovereign equality of states, the peaceful settlement of dispute, and the promotion and protection of human rights. As we meet here today, Lesotho notes with concern the humanitarian challenge resulting from the economic, financial, and trade embargo on Cuba, including the reported impacts on access to healthcare, education, essential services, water and sanitation, food security, energy supplies, and well-being of vulnerable populations. The welfare and dignity of the people must remain at the center of our collective efforts. We believe that sustainable solutions to international disputes are best achieved through constructive dialogue, mutual respect, adherence to international law, and meaningful multilateral engagement. In this regard, Lesotho reiterates its support for a rule-based international order grounded in the purpose and the principle of the Charter. Mr. President, Lesotho calls for the lifting of this economic, financial, and trade embargo on Cuba in order to afford the Cuban people their most desired development. At a time of growing global tension, it is imperative that all member states refrain from actions that may escalate tension and intend to work hard towards fostering peace, stability, development, and realization of human rights for all. In the spirit of multilateralism, Lesotho encourages continued engagement through diplomatic channels and support efforts aimed at promoting understanding, cooperation, and mutually beneficial solution consistent with international law and the objective of the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lesotho. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Mr. President, we appreciate the convening of this debate and align ourselves with the statements delivered by the G77 in China, NAM, and the OIC. Bangladesh reiterates its principal position against the economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed on Cuba. Such unilateral coercive measures are inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, including respect for international law, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. For more than 6 decades, this embargo has adversely affected lives and livelihoods of the Cuban people, including their access to essential goods and services. We underscore that access to food, medicine, energy, technology, and development finance must never be obstructed. We are particularly concerned that these measures impede the realization of the right to development, with the general population bearing the greatest burden. Bangladesh recognizes Cuba's long-standing contribution to South-South cooperation, including in the health sector, and expresses its solidarity with the Cuban people during this difficult time. To conclude, Mr. President, we reiterate our call for the lifting of this embargo. Differences and disputes must always be resolved through dialogue, diplomacy, and other peaceful means. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bangladesh. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. The humanitarian situation in Cuba is affecting access to food, clean water, healthcare, and other essential services. Australia consistently supports open trade and investment, and Australia continues to support an end of the embargo against Cuba. Australia reiterates that it does not endorse the policies of Cuba. We have seen widespread reports of Cuba's failure to comply with the international human rights standards, including the ongoing restrictions on the freedom of expression and association affecting everyday Cubans. We again urge the Cuban government to respect the rights of all its population and call for the release of all political prisoners and those who are arbitrarily detained. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guatemala.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, my delegation aligns itself with the statements on behalf of the Group of 77 and China and NAM. The Republic of Guatemala reaffirms its historic position in favor of ending the economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed against the Republic of Cuba. Since 1997, my country has supported the resolutions that the General Assembly adopts on this question, in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter and international law. As a founding state of the United Nations and committed to the peaceful settlement of disputes, Guatemala promotes dialogue, cooperation, and mutual respect among states as fundamental bases for peace, development, and the well-being of peoples. When addressing this subject, my delegation would like to highlight the human dimension of it. Prolonged restrictions affecting economic and commercial exchanges can have significant repercussions on the daily life of the population, particularly the most vulnerable groups. Difficulties in accessing essential goods, medicines, technologies, and inputs for productive activities can impact fundamental areas such as health, food security, education, and general well-being. These circumstances tend to have the greatest impact on children, women, older persons, and persons with disabilities, hindering efforts aimed at achieving sustainable and inclusive development. Guatemala considers that trade, international cooperation, and exchanges among peoples are valuable tools for fostering economic growth, strengthening national capacities, and expanding development opportunities. In that context, Guatemala reaffirms its commitment to dialogue, cooperation, multilateralism, and respect for international law, with the conviction that they constitute the best way to promote development and the well-being of peoples in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Guatemala. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of North Macedonia.
Mr. President, my country voted against the proposal to convene an additional plenary debate on this agenda item. In doing so, my delegation wishes to state clearly that our position does not stem from a lack of empathy and should not be interpreted as a lack of solidarity with the people of Cuba. At the same time, we believe it is important to acknowledge the broader context. The prolonged hardships faced by the Cuban people cannot be viewed in isolation from decades of discredited communist economic policies that have failed to deliver prosperity, pervasive systemic corruption, and the continued violent repression of the Cuban people through persistent restrictions on fundamental freedoms, political pluralism, and human rights. We are further concerned by Cuba's policies and actions that undermine democratic values and international peace and security, including the long-standing support for authoritarian regimes, its historical backing of communist insurgencies and actors associated with international terrorism, as well as credible reports of Cuban nationals providing assistance to Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. However, we must emphasize that the General Assembly already concluded a comprehensive and substantive debate on this agenda item during the main part of the 80th session in October 2025. Reopening the same debate only a few months later runs counter to our collective commitment under the UN 80 initiative to streamline the work of the General Assembly, avoid unnecessary duplication, and ensure the efficient use of its time and resources. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of North Macedonia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belize.
Thank you, Mr. President. Belize supported the resumption of this debate because the dire circumstances that confront the Cuban people warrant it. Belizeans are deeply concerned for the ongoing shocks that Cuba and her people are made to endure. Rolling blackouts, the postponement of tens of thousands of scheduled surgeries, disruptions to child immunization campaigns, and a broader deterioration in socioeconomic conditions place the well-being of some 10 million Cubans at serious risk. These cascading effects stem in significant part from the acute fuel shortages that began early this year, when measures restricting oil shipments to Cuba compounded damage already inflicted by recent climate events, including Hurricane Melissa last October. This crisis sits atop the long-standing economic, commercial, and financial embargo that has constrained Cuba's access to financing technology and international markets for over 6 decades, and which this Assembly's annual resolution has condemned as inconsistent with international law. Even more concerning, both the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Havana and the Secretary General have confirmed that Cuba's humanitarian situation could deteriorate further and could potentially collapse absent urgent international support and unimpeded access to fuel and essential goods. We welcome the efforts of the UN country team in Cuba and of member states and regional partners who have extended humanitarian assistance, including through bilateral shipments of fuel, food, and medical supplies. These efforts merit our continued support. We urge that all humanitarian channels remain open, depoliticized, and adequately resourced. We note with concern the funding gap identified in the UN's own cooperation framework for Cuba, and we urge member states to help close this gap without delay. We further underscore the importance of ensuring that humanitarian exemptions long recognized under international frameworks are honored in practice and not merely in principle, so that food, medicine, and medical equipment reach the Cuban people without obstruction, undue delay, and without fear of secondary sanction. This Assembly, as a principal deliberative organ of the United Nations, has the standing and the responsibility established under the Charter to serve as a platform for multilateral dialogue and engagement. We call on all parties to respect international law, to pursue dialogue with urgency and in good faith, and to act on the basis of mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, consistent with Article 2 of the Charter. Belize will continue to stand, as it has for decades, in solidarity with Cuba, its people, and the right to self-determination. We call on the international community to act with urgency, with compassion, and with full respect for international law. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belize. Distinguished colleagues, we have heard the last speaker on the debate on this item. I want to inform the delegations that the exercise of the right to reply has been requested, as announced in the President's letter dated 6 January and 20 May 2026, it had been proposed that time limits for statements in exercise of the right to reply under this item will be limited to 5 minutes for the first intervention and to 3 minutes for the second intervention. The delegation of Cuba has informed the President of its objection to this proposal. Accordingly, the proposed speaking time will not be applied to the exercise of the right of reply under this item. May I nonetheless remind the delegations that statements in the exercise of the right of reply are limited to 10 minutes for the first intervention and to 5 minutes for the second intervention and should be made by delegations from their seats. I call on the representative of Israel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel is responding to the Palestinian delegation. We provide our assistance to the populations that need it. Israel remains committed to providing assistance and to meet humanitarian needs. Israel is facilitating the entrance of humanitarian assistance to Gaza, but Hamas is not shouldering its responsibilities and is not working for the benefit of the Palestinian people.
Hamas is a terrorist organization that is preventing the Palestinian people from their rights and jeopardizing their lives. The international community should distinguish between the Palestinian people that requires help and between a terrorist organization using the suffering of the people to achieve its goals. The true attention or concern for the Palestinian people is to reject the terrorism of Hamas and to hold them accountable and to guarantee that assistance reaches civilians and not to assist terrorism.
I call on the representative of Cuba.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are forced to exercise our right of reply in the face of the unfounded and unacceptable accusations made by the delegation of Israel against my country. On a matter of basic decorum, we will avoid referring to other statements that follow patterns dictated from Washington, like Israel and two other delegations today read out in this room. It is shameful that the representative of Israel, whose government is facing an unprecedented rejection by the international community for genocide, grave violations of international law and international humanitarian law that it is committing against the Palestinian people, attempts to criticize Cuba. Instead of giving lessons, the genocidal state of Israel should first and foremost answer for the devastation, the suffering, and the death that its actions have brought about in Palestine and other Arab territories. While the world is witnessing with horror the systematic destruction of cities, hospitals, schools, and displaced persons camps, the delegation of Israel, without any morality, is repeating a pattern written in Washington to justify the economic suffocation of my country. The cynicism of this seems to know no limits. We will never accept those attempting to justify the massacre of the Palestinian people, simultaneously trying to legitimize a policy of collective punishment against the Cuban people. Our voice will not be silenced by those who attempt to replace international law with force, impunity, and double standards. Thank you very much.
I call on the representative of Israel for a second intervention.
Thank you, Mr. President. We take the floor in response to the statement made by the representative of Cuba. It is deeply ironic to hear accusations against Israel from a regime that has spent decades denying its own citizens in the most basic democratic freedoms. A government that suppresses political opposition, restricts freedom of express, and silence independent voices, punish and credibly lecture others on human rights and democracy. Unlike this regime, Israel is vibrant democracy where citizens have the right to openly debate, criticize their government, express their political views, organize, and peacefully demonstrate it, including against government policies. The Cuban regime's attempt to shift attention away from its own record of repressions do not change the reality faced by the Cuban people. Israel's criticism is not directed at the Cuban people. It is directed at the regime that has denied them the freedoms, the opportunities, and dignity they deserve for decades. I thank you.
Distinguished colleagues, the Assembly has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of Agenda Item 38. As announced in the Journal of the United Nations, the Assembly will resume the 92nd plenary meeting and the high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS immediately after the adjournment of this meeting to continue the debate on the Agenda Item 10 in the high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS. The meeting is adjourned. Distinguished colleagues, the 92nd plenary meeting of the General Assembly is resumed. The Assembly will resume its high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS to hear the remaining speakers in the debate. Delegations are reminded that statements are limited to 3 minutes for individual delegations and 5 minutes for statements made on behalf of a group of states. When a representative exceeds her or his allotted time, the President shall call the speaker to order without delay, which will be done by means of automatic microphone cutoff. To assist delegations in managing their time, a countdown clock will be displayed on the screens. Having said this, I would like to appeal to all speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to facilitate interpretation into the 6 official languages. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Monaco.
Une solidarité internationale.
International solidarity and sustained multilateral commitment have helped us to achieve, over the past 2 decades, to achieve significant progress in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Thousands of lives have been saved, access to treatment has significantly been broadened, and new cases of infection have been diminished. These results reflect the fact that when the stakeholders and actors of the international community act together, major progress is possible. Today, however, this progress is under threat. Conflicts, multiple crises, proliferating crises, specifically the reduction in international financing, is compromising the hard-won gains. In a number of countries, consequences already visible, including interruption of healthcare services, supply chain disruptions, reduction of tracking and prevention operations, with a particular impact being felt by those who are most vulnerable. In the light of this situation, we cannot reduce our efforts. For nearly 20 years, Monaco has been supporting UNAIDS, a historic partner in international cooperation. We firmly believe that health is a basic right and an investment in the future. And the Principality has also determined the 8th to address AIDS and other diseases, and to increase our voluntary contribution to the fund. We also are continuing to support community-based efforts and expertise, providing local services to people and awareness raising. These are of critical importance in order to deliver appropriate responses to reflect the realities on the ground. Beyond the question of financing to provide for health-related sovereignty, we also must see to it that our responses are firmly rooted in human rights. Discrimination, gender-based violence, stigma targeting persons residing with HIV and those who are most exposed represent obstacles to access to health care and therefore obstacles to eradication of the epidemic. Ending AIDS as a threat to public health by 2030 is an objective which is within our reach, but the only way to achieve this is if we demonstrate a renewed political commitment, greater solidarity, as well as a collective responsibility which we shoulder. We reaffirm our full support for the recommendations set out in the Secretary General's report, and we will continue alongside our partners to pursue our commitment to sustainable, inclusive results rooted in the law in order to ensure that nobody is left behind. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Monaco. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kazakhstan.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Kazakhstan warmly welcomes the adoption of the 2026 Political Declaration on HIV/AIDS and fully aligns itself with the global commitment to end AIDS by 2030. In line with 2021 Political Declaration, the government of Kazakhstan is implementing the comprehensive roadmap to eliminate barriers, reduce stigma, and accelerate progress towards the 95-95-95 target. Kazakhstan shows the true national leadership by funding 96% of its HIV program internally. HIV prevalence among the 15-49 age group has decreased to 0.35%. Last year, the number of new cases dropped by 10%. We are steadily advancing towards the global milestones with our current national indicators standing strong, 86, 92, 94. HIV treatment is comparatively free for all citizens. We utilize the most advanced and effective medications, which have led to a dramatic six-fold reduction in AIDS-related mortality since 2011. Our success is anchored in our global leadership in primary healthcare, driven by the landmark international initiative launched by the President of Kazakhstan, Mr. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, to establish the Global Coalition on Primary Healthcare, backed by the WHO. The coalition unites nations to build a resilient health system. In line with the global agenda, throughout our new standard of care, approved in October 2025, Kazakhstan has officially decentralized HIV services, transferring medication distribution and patient monitoring from specialized center directly to local family physicians and clinics. This structural integration amplifies our biomedical and digital innovations by expanding self-testing, index testing, and digital solutions like online ordering with anonymous home delivery. We have achieved record high diagnostic research. To ensure comprehensive care, we are currently amending our National Health Code to fully cover all HIV associated at the outplanet level. Finally, our sustainability relies deeply in civil society. Kazakhstan operates
I thank the distinguished representative of Kazakhstan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Mr. President, Armenia welcomes convening of the high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS and reaffirms its commitment to the global goal of ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. Over the past decade, Armenia has achieved significant progress in HIV prevention, testing, treatment, and care. HIV prevalence among key populations has remained below 5%, while among pregnant women below 1%. These results have been achieved through implementation of treat-all approach, expansion of prevention and testing services, strengthening of community-based interventions, and the gradual decentralization of HIV services. At the same time, we recognize that important challenges still remain. This demonstrates that sustained efforts are required to strengthen prevention, further broaden access to relevant services, and address emerging vulnerabilities, including those associated with population mobility and migration. Armenia considers sustainability of the HIV response as a strategic priority. The implemented reforms facilitated a successful transition from donor-supported procurement to full domestic financing. Since 2024, the government of Armenia has financed 100% of antiretroviral and anti-tuberculosis medicines from public resources. Armenia firmly believes that ending AIDS requires more than biomedical interventions. It requires addressing stigma and discrimination, removing barriers to services, promoting meaningful engagement of communities, civil society, and ensuring equitable access to prevention, treatment, and care for all populations in need. As Armenia advances its health sector reforms, including the introduction of universal health insurance, we view the HIV response as an integral component of broader efforts to achieve universal health coverage and build resilient health systems. We would also like to address words of gratitude to co-facilitators of political declaration on HIV/AIDS, Georgia and Botswana, for their energetic efforts. Armenia supports a pragmatic, evidence-based approach that prioritizes protection of human rights, sustainable financing, equitable access to health services, community engagement, and integration of HIV services within stronger health systems. In conclusion, we would like to express Armenia's steadfast commitment to working with all international partners to accelerate progress towards ending AIDS by 2030 and achieving the health-related sustainable development goals. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Armenia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
Mr. President, the Sultanate of Oman wishes to express its appreciation for the convening of this high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS, which represents an important opportunity to renew international commitment to ending this epidemic as a public health threat by 2030. Oman also reiterates that investment in maternal and child health constitutes a fundamental pillar for achieving a sustainable development and enhancing the well-being of societies. Oman is proud of its achievement in eliminating the mother-to-child transmission of HIV and syphilis. In 2022, Oman received the World Health Organization's validation certificate, becoming the first country in MENA region to achieve this milestone, based on an integrated health system and effective primary care programs. This achievement was built on a comprehensive health system that attained high-performance indicators, including antenatal care coverage exceeding 99% nationwide, HIV testing coverage among pregnant women reaching approximately 96%, and syphilis testing coverage approximately 99.9%. Maintaining an extremely low rates of congenital syphilis within the internationally recognized thresholds, a high-quality national laboratory network, and fully integrated electronic health information system covering both public and private health institutions. To consolidate this success, in May 2026, Oman received the World Health Organization recognition of sustained elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV and syphilis, reflecting its continued commitment to relevant international standards and indicators. Oman will continue implementing WHO recommendations, strengthening prevention and treatment programs, enhancing monitoring and follow-up systems, and raising community awareness, thereby helping to preserve this national achievement and support international efforts toward achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and ending AIDS as a public health threat. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Oman. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, my appreciation goes to the President of the General Assembly for convening this meaningful high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS as we work to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. Despite long-standing common efforts by the international community, the recent slowing of the trend in the decline of new HIV infections globally indicates that we must redouble our efforts now more than ever. Under the vision Zero New Infections, Zero AIDS-related deaths, and Zero Discrimination, the Republic of Korea is sparing no efforts to reach the global target of reducing new HIV infections by 50% by 2030. Against this backdrop, we have established the second National HIV/AIDS Prevention and Control Plan from 2024 to 2028, implementing a package of comprehensive whole-of-government measures. As a result, in 2024, we saw a modest decline of new infections, while the treatment rate reached 97.7% and the viral suppression rate 96.5%, thus surpassing the second and third 95, 95, 95 targets. This achievement was realized through integrated cooperation among medical institutions. We are striving to enhance access to early diagnosis through testing tailored to key populations and subsidies for HIV testing costs. Furthermore, we aim to expand access to pre-exposure prophylaxis, which we have supported through government-led programs since 2024, and to construct a healthcare environment that better eliminates stigma and discrimination against people living with HIV by expanding public awareness campaigns. Mr. President, the goal humanity shares to end AIDS by 2030 simply cannot be achieved by any single country alone. Instead, it requires close coordination that transcends national borders. As a responsible member of the international community and champion of public health, the Republic of Korea is committed to sharing its policy experience and continuing its steadfast cooperation until we succeed in truly ending AIDS in an inclusive manner that leaves no one behind. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative.
أشكر ممثلة جمهورية كوريا الموقرة، والكلمة الآن لممثلي منغوليا. حضرة الرئيس، تضم منغوليا صوتها لبيان الفلبين باسم تحالف.
We would like to make the following remarks in its national capacity. Mongolia welcomes the adoption of the 2026 Political Declaration on HIV/AIDS and reaffirms its commitment to ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. Despite significant progress in the global HIV response, the world is off track. In 2025, 1.2 million people acquired HIV and 570,000 people died of AIDS-related causes, underscoring the urgent need for renewed commitment, sustained investment, and accelerated action. Persistent inequalities, stigma, and discrimination, financing constraints, and gaps in access to prevention and treatment services continue to impede the progress. Mongolia is a country with a low-level HIV epidemic concentrated among key populations. We have strengthened community-led prevention and testing services, expanded outreach efforts, introduced self-testing, enhanced case-based surveillance, and improved strategic information systems to support targeted interventions. Through close collaboration among government institutions, healthcare providers, civil society organizations, and international partners, we have strengthened the linkage challenges persist. Ensuring timely diagnosis and reaching all individuals at risk continues to require focused attention. Strengthen early detection, expand access to testing services, and increase the awareness and uptake of prevention measures are key priorities going forward. Mongolia's experience demonstrates that sustained investment in prevention, strategic information systems, and community engagement is essential. The global HIV response. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mongolia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Mr. President, the world stands at a critical juncture in its response to HIV. Despite decades of progress, we still face persistent inequalities, stigma and discrimination, reduced financing, and overlapping crises. Today, we reaffirm Lebanon's unwavering commitment to the 2030 agenda, to universal health coverage, and to the right health system. Lebanon has long recognized HIV as a public health priority. Through its national AIDS program, it continues to provide antiretroviral treatment free of charge, strengthening prevention and voluntary counseling and testing, very often in partnership with civil society organizations and community representatives. Lebanon remains committed to integrating HIV services within primary healthcare and universal health coverage, including linkages with sexual and reproductive health systems and services, maternal and child health, tuberculosis, and with hepatitis, among others. Mr. President, ending AIDS requires addressing sexual and gender-based violence, discrimination, and all structural barriers that prevent people from accessing services with dignity. We underscore the importance of resilient and integrated health information systems with high-quality data that is essential to improve linkage to care, prevent loss to follow-up, access to medicines, diagnostics, and health technologies. For developing countries, technology transfer, voluntary licensing, and local production capacities are indispensable means to our joint struggle. Commitments cannot be achieved without adequate and sustainable financing. Low and middle-income countries would need around $22 billion annually through 2030 to stay on track to end AIDS. International solidarity, development cooperation, and innovative financing mechanisms remain central to our efforts. Mr. President, Lebanon stands ready to work with all partners to accelerate action. We should remain united in solidarity to end AIDS by 2030. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lebanon. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda.
Mr. President, my delegation chart a renewed path towards ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. We wish to thank the President of the General Assembly and the co-facilitators, the permanent representatives of Botswana and Georgia, for dedicated leadership in guiding this process. We also thank UNAIDS for their continued global partnership and continued partnership with member states and their steadfast advocacy for the global AIDS response. We welcome the adoption of the political declaration that supports national efforts to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030, while respecting national policies and priorities and taking into account different national realities, capacities, and levels of development. Uganda continues to be guided by the 4th National Development Plan 2025 to 2030, the Uganda Vision 2040. HIV prevalence among adults now stands at 4.9%, down from 18% in 1990. Living with HIV are aware of their status, 90% on antiretroviral therapy and 96% virally suppressed. More than 1.4 million Ugandans are now on treatment, and we continue to advance towards eliminating mother-to-child transmission. Uganda also welcomes progress on access to innovation. In April this year, we launched a twice-yearly injectable HIV prevention medicine its technology to generic producers, and we call for accelerated technology transfer, local manufacturing capacity, and equitable, affordable access to new HIV prevention and treatment tools for all countries, particularly in Africa. Despite this progress, we continue to record an estimated 100 new HIV infections daily, with adolescent girls and young women bearing a disproportionate share. We must do more to strengthen prevention and violence against health systems and domestic resource mobilization. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Sustained political commitment, scientific progress, and predictable investment at the national, international, and regional levels. Namibia and the steady progress towards 95, 95, 95 targets. Notably, Namibia has become the first country in Africa to nearly eliminate mother-to-child transmission to primary health care and antenatal care. Mr. President, we support efforts aimed at strengthening technological transfer, expanding local and regional manufacturing capacity, capacity is not only a matter of health security, but also of equity, resilience, and sustainable development. Namibia is, however, concerned by the decline in global financing for HIV programs. For global HIV response. We take note of the outcome document of the high-level meeting in the form of a political declaration, as well as the UNAIDS Global HIV the financing gap, uphold equity and human dignity, and ensure that no one is left behind. Finally, Namibia aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Excellency, it could not be adopted by consensus. Switzerland thanks all of the stakeholders for their engagement. Considerable progress has been made in the fight against HIV over the past decades, changing the course of countless lives. This was possible thanks to particularly its collaboration with civil society and communities remains essential. Today, we find ourselves at a critical juncture. The gains that have been achieved are threatened by and people-centered HIV response remains a fundamental pillar of international action. No lasting progress can be achieved without addressing the specific needs of vulnerable populations stronger links with drug policies. Finally, Switzerland recalls the need to strengthen community leadership and to ensure the full and effective participation of communities in decision-making processes at all levels of the HIV to ensure equitable access to prevention, treatment, and care. Excellencies, the adoption of the political declaration reaffirms our collective determination to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. Achieving this goal is our shared responsibility
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
President, Excellencies, around the world human rights are being weakened. Conflicts, crises, and climate disasters is making it harder for those most in need to access even basic services. This strikes directly at the global HIV response. Yet the past decades have shown us what is possible when we get it right, when science, solidarity, that progress depends on trust, on working across sectors and truly engaging those most affected. HIV thrives where inequality, stigma, and discrimination persist, and where political commitment is weak. Key populations continue proven evidence-based measures, including harm reduction. It means ensuring access to comprehensive sexuality education and protecting and advancing sexual and reproductive health and of the global health architecture. We must appreciate the impactful work of the UN system under the joint UN program UNAIDS and commit to sustain this vital capacity and expertise but we are not across the finish line. This is the moment to recommit to human rights, to equity, and to dignity for all, because that is what it takes to end AIDS as a public health threat. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Brunei Darussalam welcomes the convening of the high-level meeting and aligns every diagnosis matters and requires a timely, compassionate, and people-centered health response. Access to healthcare remains a fundamental priority within our national system. Our response rests on of a durable HIV response, and it places us in step with the new emphasis on national ownership and sustainable financing in the 2026 to 2031 Global AIDS Strategy. As we for hepatitis B, syphilis, and HIV as part of standard maternal care. This supports our ambition towards the triple elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV, hepatitis B, and syphilis, a milestone so that more people begin treatment early when outcomes are best. As a small state, we recognize the importance of continued international cooperation and knowledge sharing. Brunei Darussalam values its partnership with UNAIDS, the World Health Organization, and the broader international community. We reaffirm our commitment to a health response that is grounded in compassion, dignity, and care for every person.
Brunei Darussalam. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative, observer of the Observer State of Holy See.
Mr. President, the Holy See acknowledges the number of new HIV infection has declined in the most regions since 2010. with the greatest decreases in sub-Saharan Africa. Having access and adherence to antiretroviral treatment, people with HIV can live longer and lead healthier lives. Multisectoral partnership have been key to reducing costs and expanding availability to treatments and should be further strengthened. Indeed, many still are excluded from such treatment, mostly in the developing world. As Pope Leo XIV has said, we cannot conceive a society that races ahead at full speed, clinging to the false myth of well-being, while at the same time ignoring so many situations of poverty and vulnerability. Strengthening health systems and building capacity for medical research, development, innovation, and production in developing countries are essential to ensuring consistent care and treatment for all, which ultimately contributes to the promotion and protection of God-given human dignity. My delegation would like to draw special attention to children who remain particularly vulnerable to HIV. Gaps in both diagnosis and treatment mean that the 3% of HIV patients that are children account for 12% of deaths due to HIV. These disparities begin with their mothers who are at risk and HIV positive who do not receive adequate testing and consistent treatment. Quality antenatal as well as perinatal and postpartum care protects both mothers and their children. It is vital to ensure early testing and consistent access to treatment for children with HIV in child-friendly formulations. Mr. President, the Catholic healthcare institutions, which provide approximately a quarter of all HIV-related care worldwide, will continue to do their part in their efforts to ensure that all people living with HIV receive treatment and care in line with their inherent human dignity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished observer of the observer state of the Holy See. Distinguished colleagues, we have heard the last speaker in the plenary. May I take it that it is the wish of the Assembly to conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 10. It is so decided. The meeting is adjourned.
you.